کنفرانس‌های بین‌المللی با شرکت شخصیت‌های سیاسی، تحلیلگران، متخصصان و پارلمانترها درباره رویارویی مقاومت و قیام مردم ایران با دیکتاتوری آخوندی.
کنفرانس پیامدهای بسیج رژیم آخوندی برای شیطان سازی و اطلاعات گمراه کننده.
سخنرانی‌های استرون استیونسون، هماهنگ کننده کارزار تغییر برای ایران، کندیس برگن، رهبر حزب محافظه‌کار کانادا 2022، وزیر توسعه اجتماعی 2015، لویی فری، رئیس پیشین اداره تحقیقات فدرال آمریکا اف.بی.آی.
استرون استیونسون. طی 15 سالی که در پارلمان اروپا بودم، هر بار که ما قطعنامه‌ای علیه آخوندها به اجرا می‌گذاشتیم، مشاور ارشد گروه سوسیالیست به نام ممدوف به گروه سوسیالیست توصیه می‌کرد که باید این قطعنامه را رد کنید و اصلاحاتی را برای توقف قطعنامه ارائه می‌کرد و ما به طور مستمر می‌گفتیم که این فرد باید مزد بگیر آخوندها باشد.
پنتاگون چند سال پیش خدابنده و همسرش را به عنوان مأموران آموزش دیده وزارت اطلاعات و امنیت معرفی کرد که با هزینه وزارت اطلاعات مقالات طولانی به نام آنها در وبسایت آنها برای بدنام کردن شورای ملی مقاومت و دروغ و افترا بستن به مجاهدین ظاهر می‌شد و 3 هفته بعد این مقالات در گاردین یا اشپیگل بازنشر می‌شد.
باید آگاه باشیم که کارزار شیطان سازی بر اساس ادعاهای پوشال و مزخرفات استوار است که ارزش کاغذی را که روی آن نوشته شده است ندارد.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your participation and your attendance here this afternoon. My name is Azadeh Betty and I will be your moderator at this panel session where we will be looking at disinformation and the impact that it has on Western government policy towards Iran. Our aim during the next hour or so will really be to look at the campaign that has been conducted and orchestrated by the Iranian regime, but with a particular focus on the impact that it has on Western government policy, but also on policymakers around the world. I'd like to kick off with Mr. Struan Stevenson. I'll turn around. Struan, I know that in your decades of experience as a parliamentarian and as a politician, you have really written extensively about this subject, but also you've delivered many speeches with regards to the misinformation campaign that has been orchestrated by Iran's Ministry of Intelligence and Security. You've also looked in particular at how there are cooperative journalists and lobbyists that in fact do further the agenda of the Iranian regime. Perhaps you'd like to kick off really by telling us the modus operandi of the Iranian regime in this regard and also your experiences. Perhaps you could elaborate.
I should start by saying what wonderful news that we heard that attempt to ban the huge rally tomorrow in Place des Invalides has been overturned by our lawyers. As you were saying, I've written quite a few books. My most recent one was entitled Dictatorship and Revolution, A Contemporary History of Iran. And one of the chapters I entitled The Demonization of the Opposition. Having supported the NCRI, the MEK for the past 2 decades, I've come across that on many occasions, and many people in this room and many people in this panel will have had similar experiences. I had an 18-month court case in America where a guy had, and this was quite recent, a guy who had been arrested by the F.B.I. and charged with being a foreign agent. I wrote an article because he had accepted $250,000 from the Iranian embassy to the United Nations in New York. And he had been lobbying the Senate, Congress, about the wonders that were being achieved by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And he was writing articles and books saying how great the mullahs were. And I wrote an article saying this guy was a spy. In America, to be charged with being a spy is different, apparently, from being charged with being a foreign agent. So he sued me for libel and defamation. And in the court, I told the lady judge, I said, listen, I come from the UK where we invented James Bond, who was a spy and a foreign agent. And the judge laughed and threw the case out. But, you know, this was an example to me of how the Iranian regime has infiltrated virtually to the top of parliaments, society, academia. I remember when I was 15 years in the European Parliament, every time we put down a resolution that was critical of the mullahs, there was a senior advisor to the socialist group, a guy who was a Lithuanian Iranian called Mammadov. And he would always advise the socialist group, you know, you should reject this resolution, put amendments down to kill it. And we kept saying, you know, this guy must be in the pay of the mullahs. Recently, in the Qatargate scandal, where a vice president of the parliament was found with €500,000 in a new Louis Vuitton bag, the police arrested Mammadov. And lo and behold, he was not only being paid by the Qataris, he was also being paid by the mullahs. Just what we had assumed. And there he was at the height of the European Parliament, one of the senior advisors to one of the major groups. So this kind of demonization has been going on for years. When the 3,000 refugees when we finally managed to rescue them from Iraq, where they were under constant attack and being killed by missile attacks and bomb attacks, and we got them over to Albania, the Iranian embassy in Tirana, which was a very small affair with a couple of ambassador and a couple of diplomats, suddenly found great new interest in Albania. And suddenly there were 25 new diplomats, most of them agents from the Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Iran. And then all of a sudden we saw people who we identified as known agents of the regime. The Pentagon published a report some years ago identifying a guy called Kodabandi and his wife, Anne Singleton, who is English, as trained agents of the Ministry of Intelligence and Security. And suddenly they were seen flying in and out of Albania. And they were seen wandering around the outskirts of Camp Ashraf III. And very often they were seen in the company of journalists from some of the famous newspapers in Europe, like Der Spiegel in Germany, Libération in France, The Guardian in England, Channel 4 News. And we then, in due course, Kodabandi and Anne Singleton, his wife, they were running a website paid for by the MOIS. And we were seeing long articles appearing under their name on their website. And lo and behold, 3 weeks later, these articles would appear in The Guardian or Der Spiegel, attacking, defaming the NCRI, traducing the MEK, and using people who had defected from Camp Ashraf, and they would want to return to Iran, and they would quickly be recruited by the MOIS and told, if you want to return to Iran, you do what we tell you for the next 2 or 3 years. And you must traduce, you must tell all these lies and defamations about the MEK. And we saw in some of these articles that appeared in these newspapers I mentioned, guys were telling the reporters, we were tortured, people were kidnapped, there was even a murder of somebody inside Camp Ashraf. I mean, it was absolute propaganda nonsense from top to bottom. We should be aware that this demonization campaign is based on, if I was a farmer, I would use a word that begins with bull. This is not worth the paper it's written on. It is typical of the propaganda that emanates from this regime. But I can tell you, last week, when we published the fact world leaders have signed a statement backing the right of the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their tyrannical regime, and backing the NCRI, backing the MEK, and Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, the charismatic leader. So forget the demonization. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to win. We are going to make Iran free again. And the MEK, Mrs. Rajavi, the NCRI are at the forefront of this campaign. Thank you.
کندیس برگن، رهبر حزب محافظه‌کار کانادا 2022. من در اجلاس زنان در ماه مارس در بروکسل شرکت کردم و در مورد زنان شورای ملی مقاومت صحبت کردم. زنانی قدرتمند که رهبری مبارزه را با ستمگران، مستبدان و قاتلان بر عهده دارند.
بعد از این سخنرانی من مورد حمله قرار گرفتم. دستور کار، بی‌اعتبار کردن مخالفان رژیم و ترساندن من به عنوان یک نماینده منتخب. به نحوی که بگویم آیا من همراه یک سازمان خوب هستم یا نه؟
خوشبختانه می‌دانم که از یک سازمان باور نکردنی حمایت می‌کنم و بخشی از آن هستم که با بسیاری دیگر برای آزادی در ایران و دموکراسی در کشور زیبای ایران کار می‌کند.
Turning now to Candice Bergen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. During the course of this particular uprising, since of course September of last year, I really wanted to hear your experiences of how parliamentarians have really been apprised of what's happening with the Ministry of Intelligence and Security in Iran, and of course how that's been targeted against Iran's main opposition, the NCRI and MEK.
Thank you, Azadeh. It's really great to be here. Wonderful to be back in Paris. Many of us were here 5 years ago, and so many things have happened in the last 5 years. And it's wonderful to be back again and to know we are this much closer to freedom in Iran and to seeing the people of Iran living the best life that they deserve. So I'm very happy to be here. An interesting question you pose, because my colleague Judy Scrow, who is a parliamentarian from Canada, Wayne Easter is also a former parliamentarian from Canada. And although Wayne and Judy and myself are on different sides of the aisle, politically, we are all in agreement of our support for freedom in Iran. And we also are in agreement of how we've been targeted ourselves with disinformation and misinformation. So I want to give you a quick example. I was honored to be part of the Women's Conference in Brussels in March. The NCRI women had organized this incredible massive rally in support of women. I want to be standing up for women in Iran, the women who are leading the fight against the oppressors and the tyrants and the murderers. So to be able to be part of this conference and speak was a huge honor. I was very proud to be part of it. I spoke about the women of the NCRI and how strong they are. You'll know what I mean as you meet and get to know these incredible women. But I also talked about the appeasers And the appeasers that we see, many of us from countries that are democratic and free and rule of law, we see appeasers in our own country, in our own governments, in our own media, in our own academic institutions. So I spoke about this, and I was excited. It was a wonderful conference. I then posted a number of photos on my Instagram account. And I also posted photos of a number of women. I thought on Women's Day, on March 8th, I want to talk about the women who have been standing up for women. And I posted photos of women who had been shot in the eye with rubber bullets and have been disfigured, and they haven't been murdered, but they have been severely injured. And there was a number of photos that I posted. And what I was absolutely staggered, I was shocked at, I received so many comments from people that I had never heard of before. They did not follow me on my account. But the algorithm must have alerted the propaganda machine to start attacking me. And I was attacked, not for saying anything about the Iranian regime, not for exposing what they had been doing to women, but for being part of the conference. And that became, for me, a big red flag. What really is the agenda here? The agenda here is to discredit the opponents of the regime, to divide, to stigmatize, to cause disunity, to cause fear in me as an elected representative, to cause me to say, oh dear, am I part of a good organization or not? Well, thankfully, I know I'm supporting and part of an incredible organization that is working with so many others for freedom in Iran and democracy in the beautiful country of Iran. I could brush it off, and I know Judy has brushed it off as well. Judy's received letters, we received letters, we are targeted on social media. The interesting thing is how it has changed in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I also posted photos. I didn't receive the same kind of response on social media. So this is really increasing over the last number of years, and we need to expect it to increase even more. Let us make sure that in countries where we have democracy, where we have freedom, where we have accountability, that we all use the brain that God gave us, and that we reject lies, and we don't accept half-truths, and that we stand up and speak truth to power. Because I believe that as we do that in our own countries and in our own institutions, we will then send the message to regimes like the one in Iran that is trying to discredit, demonize, cause division, and in the end, it's all for their own gain. We will send a message to them that, no, we will not believe your lies, and we will stand up to your lies. Now, that's easier said than done, because we're all a part of it, and we are in some cases, we're wanting to get reelected. You have to ask yourself, why in Canada did we as a parliament vote to call the IRGC a terrorist organization? And the current government, although they support it, they won't do it. And none of us can, they have put forward some reasons that I think are thinly veiled excuses, but there's pressure. There's a lot of pressure. We are believing lies in our own countries, and we are going along with lies. And then we wonder why in countries like Iran we cannot defeat these regimes. So we have to take that stand, and I know that that's why we're all here. And I know as members of Parliament, regardless of our political stripe, that's why we're here. So that's my experience. I'm not sure if that totally answers your question.
It does.
لوی فری رئیس پیشین اداره تحقیقات فدرال آمریکا اف.بی.آی. وقتی سالها پیش با وزارت خارجه کار می‌کردیم، تا شورای ملی مقاومت و سازمان مجاهدین را از لیست تروریستی خارج کنیم، با تبلیغات جاسازی شده‌ای مواجه شدیم که افرادی در وزارت امور خارجه به طور خودکار در پرونده‌ها و یافته‌های رسمی دولتی گنجانده بودند. اف.بی.آی با همه افراد در اشرف یک مصاحبه کرد تا ببیند آیا آنها پیوندها یا اهدافی برای حمایت از تروریسم دارند یا خیر، و هیچ کس در آن دسته یافت نشد.
یک دادگاه استیناف آماده بود تا دولت را در مقابل دادگاه قرار بدهد و نه تنها اطلاعات آن را تایید نکرد، بلکه همچنین به یافته‌هایی دست یافت مبنی بر اینکه این سازمان هرگز نباید در لیست قرار می‌گرفت.
I'd like now, please, to turn to Director Free. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. Director Free, you were, of course, the director of the F.B.I. for 8 years, but also you have a very distinguished legal career, and therefore you're no stranger to the pursuit of justice and the truth. I'd like, please, for you to elaborate for our audience how the Iranian regime relies on disinformation and its demonization campaign, but also how you see it affecting US policy vis-à-vis the Iranian regime.
Well, thank you very much, Azadeh, and good to be with you all again today here. Talk a little bit about the propaganda manipulation by the regime, and I think that's a subject that everyone here not only acknowledges, but has grappled with in different ways. In our democratic countries, as Candace was saying, we have propaganda too. In our country, we have propaganda coming from political parties, from politicians on a daily basis. People tune into their network station to get what they think is a better perspective of the news. Difference is, we have First Amendment, free media. We have people with the right to speak out. We have courts of law that correct, whether it's in a defamation case or something else, lies and manipulated information. So that's the critical distinction between the regime and a democratic country. There are many others, of course. They manipulate and control information and exploit it. When we were working with the State Department years ago to remove the NCRI and the MEK from the terrorist list, we ran smack into embedded propaganda that people, State Department, had just automatically incorporated into official government files and findings. So we had a very, very difficult time undoing that. For instance, we made the point that everybody in Ashraf 1 was interviewed by the FBI to see whether they had pro-terrorism links or intentions, and nobody was found to be in that category. So even though the information was transmitted several times to the State Department, it kept getting played back to us in a number of different ways. U.S. policy, has been impacted by that, not just in the delisting, which finally occurred not because the State Department decided to correct its files and its perspective, but a court of appeals was ready to haul the government before it and not only hold it in contempt, but also make findings that the organization should never been placed on the list. Placed on the list, by the way, without the FBI ever being asked to look at the facts. So, we have to encourage opposition media. We have to encourage free speech, the kind of work that this great organization does to get the truth out, to open up the dialogue with a 10-point program that invites honesty and integrity in communications as opposed to controlling the media. And that has to be done. We're going to be dealing with these issues for a long time, and they're getting more complicated. A judge in the United States just cited 3 lawyers because the lawyers had submitted a brief to the judge using AI for their research. The problem was many of the cases cited in the brief were just made up. They didn't exist. So we all have to be on guard for that. And it's a condition that's going to be corrected only when the regime falls and the forces of democracy and freedom and truth and good journalism are able to survive. You know, there's all kinds of different manipulations of propaganda. We've seen what the regime does, which is intentional and directed towards their national policy. It can also be the result of a mistake. Sometimes a government or a foreign policy is mistaken in its assessments, and that has to be corrected by adding facts and making sure that the political dialogue is strong. So there's a lot of work to do, but I think the organization here has done enormous good work and made progress in that. But we have to be very, very careful about what our facts are. Thank you.
Thank you very much.